Hello, everyone. My name is Cristine Severo. I'm a professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil. Today, it's a pleasure to interview my colleague and friend, Sinfree Makoni, who is currently teaching in the Department of Applied Linguistics and Program in African Studies at the Pennsylvania State University in the United States. And he's an extraordinary professor at the University of Northwest South Africa, and he's also an Andrew Carnegie Fellow at Laikipia University in Kenya. His research is largely into colonial linguistics, language policy and planning, southern epistemologies, and philosophies of language. Some of his recent books include Innovations and Challenges in Applied Linguistics from the Global South with Alistair Pennycook, Language Policy and Planning, Semiotics of Space and Ethnicities, co-edited with Ashraf Abdelhey and Cristine Severo, Integrational Linguistics and Philosophy of Language from the Global South, co-edited with Kuiper Marcus, Language in Africa, and the Routledge Handbook of Language and Global South, co-edited with Kuiper Marcus. So, Sinfree Makoni, thanks a lot for attending to this interview to the Brazilian Association of Applied Linguistics. So I'm going to start with some brief questions. Makoni, can you share with us a little about your intellectual trajectory and its relation to Southern experiences and perspectives?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Cristine, for your wonderful question and for the friendship and support over the years. My trajectory towards Southern orientations to applied linguistics, I think, started from a certain level of discomfort about the relevance of applied linguistics to the local African context that I knew. What is interesting here, what I found uncomfortable was not the usual conventional orthodox applied linguistics, but it was the sort of the radical applied linguistics as it was being articulated by people like Robert Phillipson, Skupna Kangas, and then subsequently later on the research on language rights by people like Stephen May. I wasn't worried about the orthodox wing of applied linguistics. I assumed that would not be relevant to my context. The ones that I needed to be able to fully understand why I felt that it was missing the point were the approaches to critical applied linguistics as articulated by people like Phillipson and Skupna Kangas and Stephen May. I thought they didn't capture what, when I look back now, I would have called local endogenous views about the nature of language and language practices. And over time, I then gradually was able to come up with particular meta language to describe what I think was taking place. In the 90s, early 2000, I then quickly realized that the fundamental problem here was that the central theoretical apparatus in applied linguistics was the notion of language. And that was the problem for me. I then quickly realized that what was being taken for granted constituted the problem. Yeah. And everything else subsequently follows from that. But I then realized that if the discipline of applied linguistics consists of trying to apply language to testing, teaching, etc., but the notion of language itself is problematic, then you've got a problem. If you don't realize that the idea of language is the centerpiece of the problem, then you have what? A fundamental problem. Then subsequently, everything else which I've subsequently done with you, Cristine, and with Alistair and Ashraf, etc., constitutes building up on this very basic insight that what we thought was not problematic was indeed the problem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Makoni, that's the relation you make with the idea of languages as invention, isn't it? It comes from this problematization you have been making since the 90s.
Yes, that what has run through my career was that language is not a natural object. Right. That language is not a natural object, let's say like stones and everything else, etc. Right. So the entire psycholinguistic apparatus of natural language processing, grammatical judgments, is politics about language articulated in psychological language, in psychological terms. Mm-hmm. That is really the issue which is there. Then the twist to it, which I didn't know because I didn't have the language then, which you have helped me clarify, was that basically what I was trying to get at, and through the examples that you have provided in our joint work, is that what I was trying to do, which you have helped me to clarify, was I was interested in the politics of the ontologies of language. Right. That the people who talk about language teaching have a particular ontological assumption about language. The people who talk about language politics have a particular ontological view of language. But unfortunately, in applied linguistics, the meta language which we use to frame language is hardly systematically studied. So we don't have papers into the politics of the meta language of language. That is unfortunate because it is the meta language that creates the notion of language. The meta language that you use that creates the notion of language. Whether you say it's authentic language, natural language, or the nouns, verbs, etc. If language doesn't exist naturally, it is your meta language, how you talk about it, that creates it. So the debate then should be on the meta language, the ways of framing what you are talking about. Yeah.
Yes. And Makoni, you have been working hard on this discussion concerning Southern perspectives in applied linguistics language. And how would you frame the field of applied linguistics from the perspective of Global South? For example, what would be the challenges and limits?
Okay, right. It was, in the book that you and me are writing, the issue is this. This is the argument. The Global South provides us with insight into how the Global North operates. That it is the insights from the Global South which may help shape how the Global North understands itself. The contributions of the Global South to the Global North scholarship have always been underestimated because it is within the interests of the Global North not to acknowledge the contribution of the Global South in shaping how the global north understands language. And how do they do it? They do it like this. Insights from the global south are treated as insights that come from people having gone to do field work. So instead of saying I went to Brazil and interacted with different traditions of language thought, etc., the global north scholars frame what they do as having gone to the south for field work. Field work doesn't have traditions, right? It's simply a site from which you draw your data, right? So you prefer to use the diction of field work instead of the diction about the other traditions of linguistic thought that we have encountered. Yeah.
That has a connection with an extractivist perspective of
Yeah,
language.
it is. Yes, that's good. That the global south can only be useful if you extract data from it, which you then analyze using frameworks that already exist. Right. So the global south cannot provide a theoretical account, one, of itself, and two, even of the north. Right. It can only provide data that can be processed. Right. But what is interesting here is that even if you go back imperially, the global south has always provided insights into itself. For example, when the colonialists were going around different parts of the world, they would need the local travelers to help them navigate and find places. They would need the local travelers, the local people who would provide them with categorizations of different plants and all that. So there's always been information and insights from the South which were incorporated into how the North understood itself. The difference is that the contributions from the South were always anonymized. Right. You never knew who it was. You would know that there was a botanist a geologist who traveled to this part of the world. But the people who accompanied that botanist, who provided them with local information, you don't find them written about in the literature. That is part of the strategy of anonymization of the scholarship. So you can't give credit where you don't know who the person was. Right. But yes, it is part of the extractivist thing that scholarship then becomes information rather than knowledge.
And Makoni, following that, what is the importance of colonialism and decolonization in decolonization of applied linguistics?
Okay. The issue which is there is this. Colonialism is shaped applied linguistics in the sense that the way the imagination of applied linguistics is grounded is highly colonial. But the problem that is interesting here is as follows, is that the decolonial impulse is interesting in that it enables you to rethink applied linguistics differently. But the problem that is becoming clear, which you and me talk about in the book that we're writing, is that what decoloniality may mean in the US may be very different from what it means in South America. It may be very different from what it means in Africa. It may be different from what it means in Eastern Europe, right? And for example, in Eastern Europe, it's becoming increasingly clear that there's a lot of interest in decoloniality, even though some of Eastern European countries did not formally take part in colonialism, because state socialism could be regarded as one form of as an incomplete form of decoloniality. Then you have got another argument that is beginning to emerge in Denmark, etc., where the argument is that decoloniality, yes, but the people who need to be decolonized are the Danish whites themselves. Right? It's not the immigrants, it's not the Africans, etc. It is the white Danish who need to be decolonized. Why? And then you have the sharp debate that is taking place among African scholars, where people like the historian Paul Zeleza seems to be saying that that the problem about decoloniality, he says, is that it only tends to draw attention to Eurocentric knowledge, and we then overlook other types of knowledge. So when we say we're trying to decolonize things, we seem to be focusing only on European knowledge, but we seem to overlook that there were other types of knowledges which were not affected by colonial rule. Then you've got people like the philosopher Taiwo, the Nigerian philosopher Taiwo, who thinks that the issue about decoloniality, its significance has been oversold. So this is what I mean. There are different ways of understanding decoloniality across the board. So even if you're going to decolonize applied linguistics, it depends where geographically you are situated, what you understand by decoloniality within that context. If it is in Eastern Europe, you may have a very different idea. If it is in Europe, Denmark, a very different idea. If it is in an African context, you may have a very different idea, etc., about what you want to do. And what then the thing that I have learned about all this is from a recent exchange from the comments by John Joseph, who said that, and I think that's the most enlightening thing I've learned the last couple of days, that decoloniality is not likely to be effective as long as the notion of what constitutes a book remains unchallenged. You can decolonize applied linguistics, you can decolonize history, you can decolonize this, but as long as the artifact of a thing called a book remains the central organizing principle of what we mean by scholarship. You can decolonize anthropology, but if it is decolonized anthropology, but still written in the format of a book, which has not changed since the printing press, then your hands are tied. Your hands are tied. Because the underlying mechanism which brings about colonization, the book, the notion of a book, hasn't changed. Right. That is the main. So in other words, the argument I'm making is, yes, decolonization can be a mess, but as long as we have not thought about alternative forms or ways in which books can be thought about, then we are not going to make much progress.
So it includes also the modes of knowledge production,
yes,
knowledge transmission, of the concept of learning and teaching. So all these concepts are
all these things. Yes, but as long as at the end of the day we still have books, journal articles in that particular format, then we are constrained, because these are products of 15th century printing presses and that. Yeah.
And Makoni, how would Southern perspectives, for example, expand our understanding concerning the field of language policy and planning in your perspective?
Yeah. Okay. What Southern perspectives have to do with language policy and planning is to understand that that you are not so much interested in changing the language part of the policy, but in impacting the way communication takes place in a community, right? Because if the notion of language is problematic, you can't have a successful language policy that will be beneficial to people, because the notion of language itself is problematic. So your options are to shift towards saying what you should be interested in language policy is communicational planning. Right. That is what gives you room to move. Yes. Mm. Mm.
Yes, and the very sense of what does it mean to communicate?
What does it mean to communicate? And that requires you to bring in a lot of other semiotic resources. I mean, not only language, body, dress, like you and me talk about song and dance and all that. Yes, yes. Mm. Mm.
And Makoni, what major projects have been engaged in recently?
What? I didn't get you the last part.
What major projects
what major projects?
engaged in?
Yeah. Okay. The first one is this project that we have got, the Global Forum, where you and me and everybody else in Ashraf, where we meet every Friday. That really has become, at least to me, one of the most interesting projects I'm engaged in, because we meet with different people, they come and present. Last time it was Jane Gordon talking about contemporary enslavement. The previous week it was Bahir talking about Ubuntu and Nite and all that. He then talked about Ubuntu in Brazil and all that. So these have been interesting projects to me because the attendance at those forums is free. Right. So it's my small contribution to challenging the hierarchies and inequalities in terms of power. Because you just attend it. I mean, if you have time and you've got a computer and you just attend. And the material is distributed to everybody prior to the project. And you, for example, get in touch with everybody and you send them the material as well. So that, to some extent, is the most rebellious project you, me, and a couple of other people have been engaged with. It's free. Everybody, we meet a lot of different people from across the world. They don't charge us anything. And they come and they talk to us and we engage with them. We get to know what they're talking about and we move on.
So we were talking about your major projects. You were talking about
Okay,
the
yes.
yes, how we
I was saying that
capitalist.
what the reading project is doing is to provide a challenge to inequalities in access to knowledge, because in this particular forum, anybody has got access to that forum if they are interested in. What they simply need is computer access to a computer, and that, and we share with them the material that is going to be used as a basis for the talk. Today it was Jane Gordon on contemporary enslavement. The previous week it was Priscilla and Bakir on Ubuntu and Nite. And the previous week I think it was Frida Ikoto talking about emicism and Black Lives Matter, and the story goes on. And moving forward, we're going to have I think Bonnie Norton, and then there's Teresa McCarthy, Judith Ivan, and Susan Gowell at least. We're going to have every Friday for an entire year. So it's like a Christmas party every Friday, right? It's like a Christmas party every Friday. And you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to worry about visas. You don't have to worry about abandoning your work and coming back to see how this works. You just get on, you listen and all that, and you then subsequently are given access to the recordings. If you want to listen at your own time, that's okay. Right. So that is what I think is our major project, and you play a central role in it by making sure that other people get access to the materials, and we invite them. Those who want to come, come. Those who don't want to attend, they don't attend. It's free. It's free. That is one of the major projects. Then the other major project I've just completed now is the handbook where you, me, and Anna Eltman also contributed on language in the Global South. Lynn Mario wrote the foreword, in which way it's funny to think about it. This is the first handbook that deals with language in the Global South, which is interesting. Then there was another project another book project that you, me, and Ashraf edited called, what was the title of that book?
Sociolinguistics of Protesting.
Yes, then the sociolinguistics of protesting, where we are protesting against sociolinguistics. So that's another project. So in a way, we've got, like you say, we've got so many of these projects every day. I mean, it's interesting you're asking what are the projects. There's a lady who is been hired to manage the directors of different units, and I'm running African studies. So she was asking me, what exactly do I do and all that. So I was giving her a series of terms. So one of these days she'll email you to ask you, what are the deadlines for this? Because she's trying to make arrangements to make sure that I don't think she'll succeed, but let her try. Okay, to remind me that, oh, you need to do this, or you need to do. So she was asking, who is Cristine? Is she in State College? I said, no, Cristine is in Brazil. So she was sort of completely surprised that Cristine seems to occur everywhere in this project, but she's not here. I said, no, she's in Brazil. What it shows is how complicated the nature of scholarship. Scholarship is all collaboration. And you run through life with your team of collaborators, people that you know, that you work with, will become parts of your own everyday discourse about your work. Like, for example, somebody asking me about my electronic signature, and me telling them, ask Cristine. You have your own network. So from my perspective, scholarship has shifted from a project in which you are working alone to a project in which you work with some people that you work with consistently over a period of time. It is a collaborative project, right?
And Makoni, what would you tell our postgraduate and undergraduate students of applied linguistics and linguistics to engage them with Southern perspective?
Okay, yeah,
Southern
right.
views?
I would tell them this. I would tell them that the first point of entry into these discussions should be issues and topics that are of interest to them. And then they can philosophize later on about it. And I'll tell them that what Southern theories do is to provide you with perspectives that are not frequently written about in scholarship. So, for example, the example that I would give is that if you want to know an example of Southern scholarship, let's say with Southern approaches about money, you then don't go and ask the Minister of Finance. You ask somebody who is bankrupt, or you ask a beggar. The notions about money and the economy that you get from a beggar are more sociologically valid than those of people that have got money or are powerful. Right. So their understanding, the beggars, the homeless, of what society is all about, is more illuminating than the positions that you would get from those who are not beggars, who have never lived in homeless shelters. So Southern epistemologies give you a insight into what life looks like from the margins, from those that have been marginalized. Right. That is the main thing. It's like saying you want to know what is the impact of money, then you say ask those that are bankrupt, or ask the beggars. Their sense of money is the more valid account of money than those that have got money to spend. Right. So that is the way I would frame it. Right. That is the view of the world we are trying to bring to the center. For example, in Southern epistemologies, the views of the beggars, the views of the homeless are the views that are more important if you are going to design homes. Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yes, Makoni, and many thanks for this wonderful conversation. And I would also be thankful to the Brazilian Association of Linguistics and to Branca. And so I wish you a wonderful end of year.
Yes, I must say publicly, thank you very much, Christine, for all the help you have given me in my career. I need to say that publicly to the people in Brazil, that I've learned a lot more from you than the other way around. And it's always a pleasure working with you, in the sense that you are so reliable that it's completely amazing. I mean, it's some of the things that I'm not able to do very quickly, and I just ask Christine, and she's able to do that. I have students in Kenya, at times they don't have references, and Christine is able to give them very quickly. That's what I meant by saying you walk the path of life with a group of scholars who are part of your team. Right. Yeah.
And thanks a lot, Makoni, for inspiring us and teaching us how to be collaborative and solidary in academic life. So it's possible to build inspiring relationships.
Yes. And that the success of one of you is the success of all of you. Right. It's the success of all of you. It's not like, oh, Makoni is successful, therefore Christine is not successful. Success of Makoni is the success of Christine, of Anna, Eltman, of Ashraf, and vice versa. We all celebrate each other's strengths, because it is through that mutual support that we keep moving. Without that, this game will be very long. For example, I mean, the forum that we have, it's very nice to know, oh, I'm going to talk to Christine on Friday, to Ashraf and his host. It's very nice to have a sense of your global community that you keep meeting and you learn with. Yeah. Okay then. Thanks a lot.